Issue 1, the Libya connection. Libyan terrorists planted the bomb on board Pan Am Flight 103 that exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland 3 years ago, killing 270 persons, including 188 Americans. So said Scottish police and the U.S. Justice Department this week, both of whom issued warrants for the arrest of 2 Libyan intelligence agents who are accused of having acted with the full knowledge and the full consent of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, thus making this heinous act a terrorism state-sponsored act.
The Libyan government operation from start to finish.
Libya denies the charge and says it will not hand over the suspects.
Nobody surrenders his own nationals, and this way surrenders his sovereignty.
In Washington, the White House is working to forge an international response and did not rule out military retaliation. Some of the victims' families are also demanding military action, especially as a last resort.
There is an agreement amongst ourselves that military action is a viable option that must be used, especially if all other options fail.
We don't rule out any options. We are considering any number of international responses.
Assuming extradition efforts fail and Gaddafi continues to refuse to cough up the terrorists, what action should the United States take? I ask you, Mona Charen, by the way, welcome to the program, Mona. That chair has launched a presidential campaign. It will doubtless do wonders for you.
Maybe it'll launch me into your chair, John, someday. But,
another planner of a palace coup.
There are 2 problems with this episode. The first is that foreign policy is not police work. The second is that the Bush administration has been incoherent in its anti-terrorism policy. On the one hand, they've been making kissy face with the chief terrorist in the world, Hafez Assad, and at the same time they have the Justice Department indicting the convenient Libyan terrorists. It won't work. The United States should have a policy like Israel has, which is whenever an American is hurt by terrorists, we retaliate instantaneously. There should, 3 years later to issue an indictment will scare no one.
Hafez Assad, by the way, is the leader of Syria, and George Bush has said that Syria had taken a bum rap by having been charged with this terrorist act involving Pan Am 103. Interesting, wouldn't you say?
That is interesting. Bush is trying to get something out of Syria in the Middle East peace talks. Doesn't seem to be getting it, but he still is trying to woo Assad much more than he should be. I agree with Mona that we need to have a firm terrorist policy, that we deal with it swiftly and surely and militarily if necessary. There are other avenues that you can try this time. Now, there is a country that used to be the patron and is still very close to Libya. And they're supposed to be our buddies now. You know Mikhail Gorbachev, the guy at whose altar you worship so frequently, John?
Yes.
Why not? Bush is still propping this guy up. Why doesn't he see if he can't get Mikhail Gorbachev to lean on Colonel Gaddafi and get these guys extradited?
Yeah. I noticed you're a little halting here today, Fred. You're not intimidated by this Thelma and Louise on my left, are you?
I am, John.
Eleanor.
Right, yeah, it's hard to be the first anything these days anymore, but I'm pleased to be part of this historic occasion. I never thought of you as a gender setter, but here we are.
Yeah,
Can't last.
Who knows?
Who knows?
We may have a vacancy for a period, right?
Okay, but I do disagree with Mona, and well, she may be Pat Buchanan in drag, and I'm Jack Drummond in drag. It's a lot of work, but our views are different, clearly. It seems to me this notion of swift, sure retaliation is really just very simplistic. I mean, you don't know who to respond against. What you do is just set off an endless, perpetual chain. It seems to me it's really foolhardy. I think it's too politically convenient for the Bush administration suddenly to decide that the Syrians are innocent and they're going to get a couple of Libyan hitmen, and to announce the extraditions and then say, oh, by the way, we're also thinking about bombing. That's not justice. That's political desperation. And this is George Bush trying to prop up an enemy in case he needs him next year.
You think Eleanor might take about 11 months to show that extradition is impossible, and then come October it might be necessary to take military action?
That's quite possible that we could have the makings of another October surprise scare.
What another?
Morton.
What a cynic. I agree with you partly. Who are you going to bomb? You know, if you bomb Syria when you think it's Syria, and it turns out to be Libya, then you bomb the wrong person, and then you only encourage another attack. I think this is done correctly. Forensic evidence, you get the people who did it, you indict them in a system of laws,
and you ask for extradition. If you try to get your allies together to impose economic sanctions, which is what the administration is going to do. And then it's going to try to isolate Libya, and they're going to try to get all terrorist groups removed. Well, they're going to put the same kind of heat on Libya that's been put on Iraq after the war. And as the last resort, if nothing happens, then we'll try military action.
Let me say something to Morton Eleanor. Sometimes you do know who to bomb.
Well, you didn't in this case.
In this case, you didn't. Name one,
in this case, you do.
In this case, but in the instant, a year ago,
Syria.
Well, that's what you're calling for.
I wasn't calling for bombing Syria.
Eleanor.
Intervene militarily if we can't get. Let me finish. Intervene militarily. He's always pointing to somebody. Intervene militarily if we need to, because we know who the perpetrator is.
Well,
we don't know in other cases.
What is the point of bombing?
Eleanor, if you apply a standard of legality toward international affairs, then you're going to have the exact same crime control on an international level that we have domestically.
Are you saying,
wait a minute, we're being against crime
Wait a minute, are you saying that we're supposed to go shooting people in the streets of Washington, D.C., because we should apply the same standard to our domestic affairs as we do to international affairs? That's what it sounds like.
If the bombing of Pan Am 103 was in response to the bombing of Tripoli, and we've had relative calm since this period, what would be the point of going in and leveling the airport in Tripoli and inviting further terrorist attacks?
I'll explain it to you.
It's totally pointless.
It's very simple. The Libyans are guilty of mass murder. 270 people, premeditated mass murder. They need to be punished for that.
You want to
it's as simple as
invite
that.
them to mass murder more people in
wait
this
a minute.
country. War
Just a second.
isn't people.
Just to be clear,
Let justice work
Eleanor,
through the courts.
Hey, Eleanor, if it doesn't work through the courts, then you do need to use military force. You should do it the legal way first, but if that doesn't work, you've got to use the gun.
And what would your time limit be?
I want to make a couple of small points.
Jump in any time, John.
Number one, the intelligence reports are showing that indeed Syria and Iran played a role in Pan Am 103, and that will shortly be revealed.
Inside joke,
you got
right,
a scoop here. Secondly, the majority of the families of the victims want an economic stranglehold, but not military force applied in this instance, namely to cut out any landings in airplane landings in Libya and to prevent Libyan aircraft from landing on any foreign soil. Exit question on a probability scale of 0 to 10, 0 meaning 0 probability, 10 meaning metaphysical certitude. What's the probability of these two accused Libyans being tried? Mona?
2.
Freddie?
It's about right, about a 2.
Eleanor?
3.
Mort?
1.
The answer is 1. Issue 2, beating the Bush. Is George Bush beatable? Realistically, beatable? Apparently, Patrick J. Buchanan thinks he is. Pat will announce within 3 weeks that he is taking on George Bush for the 1992 Republican presidential nomination. So says Pat's sister and close political confidant, Angela Buchanan. Then, within 3 months, February the 18th, Mr. Buchanan will enter the New Hampshire primary. Buchanan's platform is likely to parallel that of David Duke, but without the fascist and
Bush has made a mistake
baggage.
is he has walked away from all this valid conservative terrain, and David Duke's issues, I saw him for 1 hour on the show, there's not a thing he said a conservative could disagree with.
This is the conservative terrain that Buchanan is talking about. 1, opposition to new taxes. 2, getting the able-bodied off the welfare rolls. 3, ending reverse discrimination, whether through quotas or set-asides. 4, curtailing gun control. 5, halting illegal immigration. 6, cutting foreign aid. 7, getting tough on crime. In other words, Buchanan will be an outsider carrying the flag of America First, an economic nationalist, filling the vacuum created by the two major parties which have both dismissed the white backlash as a fluke. Pat Buchanan, editorial writer, columnist, author of 3 books, counselor to 3 presidents, and television personality where on the McLaughlin Group he climbed to the all-time acme of his career, readying himself in this gladiator's boot camp for any destiny, any calling, howsoever heroic. Kindly assess Pat Buchanan as a candidate for President of the United States. I ask you, Fred.
Should have known when Pat got rid of that mortician's blue suit that something was up when he got that bright orange thing that he had on last week, whatever you want to call it.
A rug.
Pat right now is a one-state candidate. It's all geared around New Hampshire, an anti-tax state, a state
pro-life state,
a pro-life state, a state with a tradition and a zest for messing with incumbent presidents running for re-election. Happened to Lyndon Johnson and others. But you have to remember one thing about Pat. He is not representative of American conservatives. He's an isolationist, he's a nativist, he's a protectionist. Most conservatives aren't. But Pat will have, in New Hampshire, and if he gets beyond that elsewhere, a better primary voter message than George Bush will. Yeah. And it's the #1 issue you had. Taxes. That's a great issue.
The job openings he's created on television alone may help turn around the economy. He is David Duke with the word processor and without the sheet, although sometimes he comes close to putting on the sheet. His views on immigration, he talks about it as suicide of a nation, where he talks about the hordes of immigrants coming to dilute our Western civilization, to me is thinly veiled racism.
Mona, are you going to sit there quietly and endure this?
Look, there needs to be a right-wing challenge to George Bush, because George Bush is making the Republican Party incoherent. George Bush has abandoned all of the conservative principles on which he was elected in 1988. That Pat doesn't fully represent the right wing is the problem. He has become, in the last couple of years, a little idiosyncratic in some of these issues. And people on the Hill are concerned that he won't run a pro-growth campaign against Bush, the kind that, say, a Kemp would run.
Have you heard that the White House is urging Patrick to back off?
Actually, I haven't.
And maybe cutting a deal with Patrick?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, John, inside
maybe a little modification of George's agenda.
And what would they buy him off with?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's gun control. Who knows?
Pat would do the voiceover for the Bush campaign commercial.
Patrick profoundly believes that people in this country want to close down all the bridges to the rest of the world and hide under a rock, that we've stopped wanting to be international leaders, the first nation among all nations, and just forget about the world. He's wrong, and he ought to have a chance to test this message of his against the rest of it.
Don't you think that Pat is doing what Reagan did in '76? He's laying the groundwork for 96?
Yes,
don't you think so?
That is absolutely right. Pat Buchanan is not doing this to move George Bush to the right. He really wants to be president someday, and he's doing this now in preparation for 1996.
That's true, but wait a minute. Comparing Pat Buchanan, who's a great television commentator and a good columnist and a friend of mine, with Ronald Reagan, who is larger than life and one of the greatest political candidates ever, is ridiculous.
Well, yeah, somebody once said the presidency is not an entry-level position.
The nicest thing I can say about Pat Buchanan is that he's not doing this to boost his lecture fees. He really believes this stuff.
His lecture fees can no way can be boosted. Look, Pat has zero political experience. He has never run anything except his own computer, you know.
But he's going to embarrass George Bush in New Hampshire, and then he's going to play tag team with David Duke, who takes over in the South, and if Duke runs third party, he can do for the Democrats what George Wallace did for the Republicans, and that is make it possible to win in the South.
What do you think Pat will do in New Hampshire, voter-wise? You want to give me a percentage?
I'd say, look, to make a dent, you need to get just 20,000 votes. It's a 100,000 vote field. I'd say he'll get about 20%.
20%? Is that all? What do you think you'll get?
I'll give him 30.
What do you think?
I'll give him 32.
What do you think, Mark?
25.
I'll give him 30%. Huh? Did you hear that the Democrats are pouring into Buchanan coffers checks from all over the country?
No, John, I haven't heard that.
Especially the liberal Democrats, they think this is great.
You think they're supporting David Duke, too?
No, they're supporting, they're anxious to see the impact on George Bush.
Yeah, Republicans. Given a choice between Pat Buchanan and Ralph Nader on a write-in, I think liberal Democrats will go with Nader.
Has anyone explored whether or not Gordon Humphrey is actually going to be the general campaign manager?
I think not, but Republicans are putting all their money in Jerry Brown's campaign.
He reported to my staff that he's not backing Pat Buchanan. Can you speak to this, the former senator of New Hampshire?
The rumor was that Humphrey's hostility to John Sununu was so great that he would support Pat Buchanan, but he has, as you say, he's been a little bit...
Who's Pat's running mate going to be?
Pat's not going to get nominated. Are
you going to join his cabinet? What do you want to be, Secretary of State?
I want to be. I'm going to be in the.
She's going to head the Buchanan Environmental Protection Agency.
I'm going to be in the Amen corner.
Jane Fonda, they can do the tomahawk chop together.
Pat Buchanan may have an Achilles heel, namely the Persian Gulf War, which he opposed. In fact, the group here ragged Pat about the Buchanan-McGovern-Fonda axis during that war. Come November '92, George Bush and Republicans may try to portray Democrats, and conceivably Pat Buchanan, if he's still around, as soft on Iraq and soft on Saddam Hussein. Pat should know this. In his home state of Virginia, just 1 week ago, on November the 5th, voters got a taste of that strategy. In the contest for Virginia's 7th District congressional seat, GOP candidate George Allen defeated Democrat Kay Slaughter by a whopping 62 to 35% with the help of this Persian Gulf War commercial, which commercial did a lot to pull Allen out of a dead heat with his opponent.
For Congress, it's a question of judgment and leadership. Kay Slaughter and the liberals in Congress opposed fighting Saddam Hussein. Kay Slaughter opposed President Bush and joined anti-war protesters while our troops were at risk in the Persian Gulf. George Allen supported the decision to fight Saddam Hussein and strongly endorsed Virginia's resolution to back the president and our troops. George Allen and George Bush, judgment and leadership we can trust. George Allen, experienced conservative Republican.
Let's exit on this. Do you think that the Persian Gulf War will have enough political life in it so that it can be said that it will have a cutting issue value in the presidential elections of 1992, Mona Charen?
Yes, but only because it gives George Bush the aura of leadership.
What do you think?
No, it does that, but it also allows...
this is a national cutting-edge issue.
Yeah, I got you.
All over the country, hey. Not just conservative districts.
Is there an echo in here? The fact is, it will, because it lets Bush tag his opponents as liberals, and a liberal can't win.
What do you think?
I say no. George Allen is a war potato trying to capitalize on this war sitting on his couch.
Did you see the way he did it?
Oh, you know, that's not going to work a year from now.
You don't think so?
No, the country is closer to Pat Buchanan's America First agenda than it is to remembering a war that will be 2 years old and very frayed and tattered.
Eleanor, everyone disagreed with you about the war.
Straightening us out. Yeah. What do you have to say?
It all depends on who his opponent is.
On the one hand, on the other, give me an answer.
If it's Bob Kerrey or Mario Cuomo, of course it's going to be a major issue. If it's Clinton, it won't.
And it's a minor value in the presidential elections of 1992. To issue 3, Doonesbury's Doomsday. Vice President Dan Quayle was investigated for cocaine usage when he was a U.S. Senator, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, covered it up. So says cartoonist Gary Trudeau in his Doonesbury comic strip. The allegations are phony. They were made by a convicted drug dealer who later recanted, saying he made the whole thing up. The DEA and the Department of Justice both dismissed the charges as totally groundless. Quayle himself denounced the allegations, calling them, quote, unquote, outrageous garbage. Marilyn Quayle described the matter as a media vendetta. Meanwhile, the comic strip has triggered a storm of critiques. Pat Oliphant, columnist for the Boston Globe, calls the behavior of the press in this instance, quote, unquote, the great American scandal machine, which treats rumor and fact indiscriminately. Oliphant adds, quote, it's bad enough that Quayle has been slandered in a comic strip. What is incomprehensible is that the press has compounded the slander by treating it as news, unquote, thus legitimizing Trudeau's bogus account. A number of newspapers have refused to run the strip, including the Chicago Tribune, the Atlanta Journal, the San Jose Mercury News, the Orlando Sentinel, the Providence Journal Bulletin, the Dayton Daily News, and the Stamford Advocate, and the Buffalo News. Is Oliphant right? Is the media way out of line? And what about Gary Trudeau, the Doonesbury cartoonist? I ask you, Mona.
Well, now we're participating in this very press behavior that Oliphant decried. Look, the people can tell the difference between an investigative journalist report and just hunting for sleaze. We learned that in the Hill-Thomas affair. So this episode makes Gary Trudeau look like the McCarthyite, and it makes Dan Quayle look good.
What do you think,
Fred?
Fred?
In fact, that's right. There has been a backlash. Already Quayle was picking up popularity and respect around the country. For the first time, there was a poll last week that showed that a majority of Americans now, a narrow majority, think he should be on the ticket. Now, that may not sound like much, but for Quayle, it's a big advance.
I like to point out it's Tom Oliphant, not Pat Oliphant,
right,
so we don't perpetuate another wrongdoing here. Clearly, Trudeau is dancing on the ethical line here, but it is a comic strip. It's a satirical comic strip. It's not his best work. He's going to be hurt by this. I like it better.
Why is he going to be hurt?
Because he's made Quayle into a sympathetic figure. Nobody's going to vote against Dan Quayle because they think he's
Eleanor,
a crackhead.
You don't think it's a cheap shot?
I think it's not terribly funny, but the medicine is far worse than the illness. I'm not for censorship of this kind of work. I like it better. Let me finish. I like it better when Gary Trudeau goes after goes after George Bush. When he talked about Bush putting his manhood in a blind trust, that was good satirical humor.
Eleanor, gee, I think you're swelling it. Let me ask you this follow-up question. What about Tom Oliphant's, apologies to Tom, calling him Pat. What about Tom Oliphant's other point that the press compounded the wrongdoing, we'll call it that for the sake of the conversation, the wrongdoing of Trudeau by making it a news item, just giving it legitimacy?
I disagree with that, because by making it a news item, most journalists condemned it on all the
Trying
editorial
to straighten out the record.
Yeah, who wins in this? Dan Quayle is the clear winner.
Eleanor, if this were a liberal Democrat who were the target of this by some right-wing cartoonist, you would be outraged that they were dredging something up, that it was sleazy and rotten.
I think it was typical right-wing behavior.
It was sleazy and rotten on the part of Gary Trudeau, and he ought to know better.
Do you think, and I ask you because I know that you're a sympathizer of Dan Quayle's, if that's the right word to use in this regard.
I think he's gotten a bad rap.
Quayle really decided to make this an issue, trade off it, and try to build himself by making this all public before the Doonesbury cartoon appeared?
Yeah, he really hasn't made this a big issue. It's been a big issue on its own, and I mean, he hasn't asked newspapers not to run the strip. The problem with saying it's just a satirical comic strip, Eleanor, is this. The press syndicate that sends around this column has defended it as serious journalism, breaking a story that's been covered up in Washington. They can't have it both ways.
But everybody else knows better.
Is it safe to assume that we all feel that that Gary Trudeau is coming out as the big loser in this affair? Is that correct?
Yes.
You all nodding your head?
Yes.
Great. You know, I feel like a chaperone here. Girls on one side, boys on the other. High school dance. Issue 4, Condom Conundrum. Should condom ads be televised? Fox TV says yes, making it the first television network to accept condom ads.
I never thought having an intimate relationship would be a matter of life or death. But because of AIDS, I'm afraid AIDS isn't just a gay disease, it's everybody's disease. And everybody who gets it dies. The Surgeon General says proper use of condoms can reduce your risk, so you'd be crazy not to use them. The condoms I buy are called lifestyles. I'll do a lot for love, but I'm not ready to die for it.
Currently, networks show ads for contraceptive sponges, but not condoms. And they have demonstrated condom use on network shows, news shows. But some worry that promoting condoms will encourage promiscuity. Should networks run the kind of condom ad that we have just seen? I ask you, Fred.
Well,
I think you could bring some expertise to this.
Expertise? I hope they don't show them on Saturday mornings on the kids' cartoon shows. But
did you find that condom ad offensive?
I didn't find it offensive. I found it an argument that is not going to be effective. I mean, people aren't going to be buying a lot of condoms for health reasons. That's not why people use them, John. And maybe you'd heard.
Do you think that this kind of advertising legitimizes sex in some way? I ask you, Eleanor.
No, it doesn't legitimize or encourage. It acknowledges the real world that's out there. And it seems to me that in an era when having sex can be a death sentence, that this is an appropriate way to deal with it. The ads they're going to do are going to be more clinical than the one we just saw. And the steamy stuff that invites people to have sex goes on in primetime programming of every other kind.
Well, Eleanor's
the clinical
exactly right
stuff is what we need.
She's right about that. But
about what precisely?
About the TV programmers who broadcast invitations to sex every night on primetime television. But the fact is that liberals want to believe that condoms are the answer to the AIDS crisis and that they can still have the sexual revolution and complete libertinism regarding sexual matters if you just use a condom. It's not that simple. It's not a solution to sexually transmitted diseases. Nobody even really knows if condoms succeed in reducing the incidence of AIDS.
It's not
the only answer, the only responsible answer.
Eleanor wants to see condoms drop from airplanes, don't you, Eleanor?
Yeah, I think they should come with the amenities package in every high school. Why not? But we're saying it facetiously, but they should be
You know that
everywhere.
in New York City, 80% of the young people have had sexual intercourse by the age of 19, 80%. So does that not inspire you to think that it's better to distribute the condoms?
Look, I think on television, tasteful advertising that was sort of semi-tasteful, I thought, not, you know, not clinical, not the kind of thing that I'm surprised you actually didn't put on the demonstration of how you put a condom on. But in any event, if it's done tastefully, it's okay.
But there also,
in school, there ought to be some lessons.
I want to point out that 79% of condoms break over a course of 18 months, according to heterosexual couples who've used them. So contraceptives, like condoms, are not safe completely by any means.
Is that right?
No, but they're better than nothing. And with Magic Johnson's, all his endorsements out there, I think we're going to see Nike's and Converse and everybody else doing public announcements for condoms. That's a good thing.
Predictions, Mona Charen.
The Republicans in the House are going to revolt when RTC refinancing comes up next
Resolution
week.
Trust Corporation.
Exactly, because they're going to demand a pro-growth package in exchange for voting for the refinancing of the RTC.
Well, that's a very exciting prediction. What do you have to say, Freddie?
Maybe they're responding to the courageous advice of Jack Kemp, because George Bush isn't. You're going to see a new revisionism beginning about the Reagan presidency, in which Reagan gets a lot of credit for winning the Cold War. He deserves the credit. You see some of that revisionism in a new book called The Turn by Don Oberdorfer of the Washington Post.
Well, thanks for sharing that,
Yeah,
Fred.
I think we have two members of the Kemp for President committee here, 92, 96, or 2000.
Yeah.
It better than even odds that the Iowa State Committee, when it meets next month, will vote for secret ballots in the Iowa caucus, thereby making it more of a contest and undercutting Tom Harkin.
Quickly.
Bush will have a growth package, and he'll announce it in the State of the Union message in January.
Pat's career as presidential runner will last for 3.5 months. He'll pull out after Super Tuesday, which is March the 10th? 10th. Next week, Israel's Yitzhak Shamir tours America, New York, Baltimore, Boston, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., where he will meet with George Bush. Bye-bye.
GE is proud to support the McLaughlin Group. GE. From plastics to financial services, we bring good things to life.
Public affairs programming continues on Iowa Public Television as we present Iowa Press with host Dean Borg, coming up next.